G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here, and I'm going to make a video about casualties, courage, honour, pacifism and bravery. Because Phoenix Chastain has made a video replying to my video on This American Militarism, the myth of the greatest generation. And you can go there if you haven't seen it to see my comparison of how many people were in the nations that participated in the Second World War versus how many people were killed in each nation that participated in the Second World War. So we find that the people who got the roughest end of the pineapple, of course, were the European Jews, where one person got killed for every 1.6 that started out alive at the beginning of the war. The next people who got the worst deal, or the second worst deal, were the Germans. And there was one dead German for every 8.6 Germans who started out alive at the beginning. Then we moved to the United Soviet Socialist Republics with 1 in 11. And then I think it goes up to the Japanese might have had 1 in 20, and the Chinese had 1 in 30, and the British had 1 in 108. The Australians had 1 in 216, but if you added in prisoners of war and missing in action as well as killed in action, the Australian tally pretty much matched the British at 1 in 116. The Americans, they only had 1 killed for every 521 people, who was 516, over 500 in the Second World War. And I had also said that in the First World War, America didn't really do much by comparison to all the other people who fought in the First World War. And a subscriber of mine, Amid Billow, put in a comment telling me that I was completely wrong, because in the First World War, the Americans had 4.2 million people in their army and 53,000 of them got killed. And I said, yeah, well, bully for them, you know, like golly gosh gee darn shucks. Here in Australia, we had 4.5 million people in the whole country, and 56,000 of them got killed, and 220,000 of them went over there and watched the proceedings, and I think 150,000 of them got wounded. And they were all volunteers, whereas a whole bunch of the Americans were conscripts. So yeah, in America, in the First World War, 1 American for every 2,221 was killed. So 2,220 Americans got to read the papers and hear that, you know, one doughboy was worth 12 Fritzes or Huns. The Americans, they got a lot of propaganda and they didn't get much pain out of the First World War, comparatively speaking. You know, only 1 in every 2,200 and something was killed. In Australia, 1 out of every 80 Australians was killed in the First World War. 1 out of every 80 citizens. So I think my point still kind of stands, Amid Billow. The Americans didn't do much at all in the First World War. They just got paid to build armaments factories. Right, and then we have Phoenix Chastain, who says that the mere fact that America suffered the lowest casualties and made the greatest gains would have been presented to her while doing her military indoctrination and while in service as being evidence of the fact that Americans were better warriors because they managed to kill all their enemies and they didn't get killed themselves. And okay, yeah, I understand how that works as a mind trick, but the whole idea of the alleged nobility of military service is that one is purported to be voluntarily prepared to take a risk to protect the homeland, the hearth, the kin, the kith, the countrymen, the landscape even. That's the whole point. If one is not prepared to risk injury and death to oneself in the good of the cause, if one is only prepared to attack from a position of overwhelming force and knowing that they can blow the shit out of the landscape and then cook what's left and pave it and paint parking lines on it and still be home by Christmas, then it's about as much of a contest as if you take a claw hammer to the head of a 2-year-old. It's not noble, it's not honourable. It's fucking murder. Yeah? That's the whole kind of point. And anyway, I didn't cite the body counts and kill ratios post World War II because it wasn't really until, shall we say, the dag end of 1944 in the Pacific and after Christmas, so 1945 in the European theatre of operations, that the Americans in the field, I mean, they amassed a huge, stupendous firepower advantage for Normandy, for D-Day. But, they kind of got their asses wiped at Arnhem along with everybody else. The Battle of the Bulge did happen, in December 44. There were times when American firepower was not totally overwhelming. By 1945, yeah, America would just push the button and, kill them dead, win a medal, let's grill the fucking hill, man. But you see, the way America came to be in that position was that they had a crash armaments program for the Second World War that made the First World War look like church fete on a Sunday afternoon. Every congressional seat, every electorate with a congressman got either a military base or an armaments factory. So the unemployment that had spread across America with the Depression in the 1930s was relieved by military spending, effectively. So at the end of the Second World War, no congressman was willing to close a military base or an armaments factory lest there was an electoral backlash to the next ballot. So the Americans just found more places to pick fights. There was the Berlin airlift, there was the Korean War, there was the move from propeller-powered bombers and subsonic jets into swept-wing supersonic jets and jet bombers to deliver the first atom bombs and then the hydrogen bombs. So the momentum was enabled to continue right up and through the Vietnam War until Ho Chi Minh ethnically cleansed the moon by beating the Americans out of Vietnam and taking all of NASA's budget. And that's why maybe a third of the Apollo spacecraft are still in museums, because Ho Chi Minh ethnically cleansed the moon. Sad man who's insane and Osama bin Laden, they shot America clear out of manned Earth orbit. That's why Americans only get to visit the International Stinky Station when Premier Putin condescends to sell them a ticket on a Soviet-era Soyuz. Yeah, funny, isn't it? So that Vietnam-era tactic of reconnaissance by fire, the one where you shoot the shit out of the tree line and if it bleeds, then somebody was in it before you shot at it. That soaks up a lot of money. It bankrupted the country. But it's still the official military tactic of the United States. Their idea is to have no body bags, because it was the body bags coming home from Vietnam that turned the population onto the idea it was a stupid war. It's 1, 2, 3, what are we fighting for? Don't ask me, I don't give a damn. Next stop's Absurdistan. Be the first one on the block to get your boy sent home in a wooden box. It played in Middle America in the 1960s and 70s, but it didn't play real well in Absurdistan, did it? So, there you all are, trying to have a war with no American casualties. It's like the claw hammers over the 2-year-olds. You're not prepared to go out unless you've got stacked odds in your favour. So what that does is kind of like in the Second World War with the Japanese, it convinces your adversaries that they have no hope of getting out of it alive, therefore they don't bother with trying to get out of it alive. All they want to do is hurt you, frighten you. Kill you if they can, but frighten you is good enough. And you get the kamikaze phenomenon. And then the secular, non-religious Tamil Tigers of Tamil Elam invented the suicide belt and upped it a notch. And now you might have the best weapons and the best military and the best hoody-doody dads in the world, but you're not able to hold the territory. It's not working for you. As far as I can see, saying to yourself, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of the shattered street lamps, I shall fear no evil, because I've been issued with a 16-shot semi-automatic sidearm and a flak jacket and a taser and a can of capsicum and a collapsible baton and a secure radio linked back to a base station and a partner to stand back to back with, that doesn't actually make the world fit to live in, and it just fucks everything. Much more better to say I'm not going to bother trying to figure out what I would do if somebody attacked my wife and kids, and if I had a rifle, and if, because life's not an effing Hollywood movie. Life is not an action drama. Life is, what really happens. And what really happens is that it takes a whole lot more courage to see an angry stranger who plans on doing you harm and choosing not to fight back. It takes a lot more bravery, a lot more faith in the basic principles of how the universe works than it does to simply grit your teeth and fight back because they're here and they want to have a fight. And I know it because I've done it. I've had the doors ripped off the hut by a person with dead black eyes whose pupils were fully dilated because he decided to kill me 2 hours before when he started walking in circles around me hut because I'd annoyed him 6 weeks earlier with a text message that I knew had pushed his buttons. When he opened the door, his action threw my hand onto the handle of a knife. Not a small knife either. The action of a coward would have been to whittle my initials on his left ventricle as he crossed my threshold. But I knew I couldn't get his blood out of the carpet. I personally find that it takes a whole lot more courage and bravery not to fight back, especially when the combat has already placed a force multiplier, a deadly one, into my possession. It takes more courage not to fight. And now, speaking as a pacifist and a vegetarian, here's a souvenir of the bravest thing that I ever did. When my son was about 6 months old and my wife was maybe about to get pregnant with my daughter, we went camping in the national park. Sun was down, we had a fire lit, there were red hot coals in the fire. This was in my pocket, top pocket. I bent over the fire to put more wood on the fire, and this fell out of my pocket into the fire. I could see it in among the red hot coals. I knew I had to get my wife and her sons and my son away, and I knew I had to stop that lighter from becoming a BLEVE, a boiling liquid expanding vapor explosion. I knew I had a fixed amount of time before the heat from the red hot coals melted the tough plastic and allowed the boiling butane to jet onto the red hot coals and ignite and go off with approximately the same grunt as a stick of dynamite. As a nurse, I've read case histories of people who've lost arms and legs from having lighters go BLEVE. I shouted at my wife and at her sons, who were big enough and had legs and could move themselves. I grabbed my son, who was a baby, I moved him. As soon as I was certain that they were far enough to be outside the range of the ejected red hot coals, I then thought of trying to save the tent and the campsite, so I grabbed a 10-litre bucket of water and I went and I stood over the fire and I bent there and I counted. And I have no idea how I knew where the count was. I'm not an industrial chemist. I didn't have any temperature probes in there. I had no way of knowing when the right moment was. What I knew was that if I threw the water a second too early, the heat of the fire would evaporate the water and there would still be a red hot coal, and when the plastic let go it would still go off like a bomb in my face. And I also knew that if I waited a second too late, half a second perhaps, it would go off before the water was able to be in place to smother it. And so I counted 1 1,000, 2 1,000, 3 1,000. And on 3 1,000, I poured 10 litres of water into the heart of the red hot coals, and that's what popped out, making a quiet, gentle phut. And my wife said, "Ugh, what was all the fuss about?" And it took me around about half or 3/4 of an hour to explain thoroughly so that she could understand all of what had happened in that 5-10 seconds, wherein I was counting off the seconds before throwing the water so as not to get my head blown off. So there you go, Fee. It takes more courage to be a pacifist than it does to be a militarist. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Ciao.